even with the microphone on. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Housing and Community Safety Scrutiny Commission. I'm Councillor Ellie Cumbo, and I'm the chair of the commission. Just to start with the usual housekeeping, there are no planned fire alarm tests this evening, so if you hear the alarm, please do leave by the nearest exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is at St John's Churchyard off Druid Street. Security staff will be available to direct you. The public toilets are located off the main reception area. Please do switch your mobile phone to silent in the meeting room. Members of the public, I'm not aware if there are any, but you're very welcome to film, audio record, photograph or tweet these proceedings. But we do ask you to be considerate towards other people in the room and take care not to disturb the proceedings. If you are filming, please don't film the audience. A copy of the council's protocol for reporting and filming is available on the Southwark website. The code for accessing our Wi-Fi is capital F, lowercase r, 33, capital W, lowercase IFI, exclamation mark. The meeting is being live streamed via the Zoom platform to YouTube, and it will be available on our website tomorrow, or rather on the YouTube channel tomorrow and on the website later. Can I just remind members to raise your hand if you wish to speak, and do wait until I call on you before you contribute, and remember to turn your microphone on. Can I also just invite members to refrain from digressing into other issues than those on the agenda before us, and keep comments and questions concise and specific. Starting with apologies, I've received two sets, so one from Councillor Barry Hargrove and one from Chris Claridge. I believe everyone else is present, so that's all in order. And so we can move on to the confirmation of the voting members. Would voting and non-voting members please show their hand or respond verbally when I call out your name. So I'm Councillor Ellie Cumbo, I'm a voting member. Councillor Jane Salmon, our vice chair.
Voting member.
Councillor Sam Foster. Councillor Barry Hargrove, no. Councillor Esme Hicks. Councillor Portia Mwanganje. Councillor Emily Tester. Bassi, and Ina Negrita. Hello. That's the first set of necessities out of the way. We now have to have the notification of any items of business which the chair deems urgent. Pleased to say there are none. Disclosure of interests and dispensations then. Does any member wish to declare any interests or dispensations in respect of any item of business to be considered at the meeting? Okay, excellent. Minutes then. These are in members' packs. Could we agree to approve these as a correct record, or does anyone have any corrections to make? Agreed. Agreed. Okay, thank you, everybody. I think that brings us on to the first substantive item of business this evening, which is the interview with the Cabinet Member for Community Safety. So I'd like to welcome Councillor Dora Dixon-File and invite her to come and sit at the table. We will first be looking at the Community Safety Plan, followed by the impact of the change of domestic abuse providers from Solace to Refuge in the last few months, and finally the projected impact of the cost of living crisis on Southwark Council tenants report, covering but not limited to domestic abuse and antisocial behaviour. And I believe we also have Stephen Douglas, who is the Director of Communities, Environment, Neighbourhoods and Growth. So can I hand over to whichever of you plans to open?
Okay, thank you very much. And it's lovely to be here on the other side of the table, because I was on this committee, I think it was last year. So thank you very much indeed. So I'm just going to give you a taster of some of the things that we have found that's been really successful for our team. So I'll just whiz through that, and then I'm sure you'll have questions for me and Stephen afterwards. So the first thing on the delivery plan, which sets out our four main community safety priorities and commitments, talks about the upgrading of our street and estate lighting. For us, we actually looking at street lighting, estate lighting, sorry, and we've started that already, the work on that already, but we've got a long way to go still. So we're looking actually trying to bring that forward if possible. We also talk about tackling misogyny and violence against women and girls, of course, and our biggest, I suppose, our major campaign has been the Through Her Eyes campaign, which was a long time in planning, so there's a lot of work went into it, and we actually turned the whole idea upside down. So we had a young man, and with this story, the storyboard that people were sort of using sexist slurs, etc., against him as if he was a woman. So that was really, that caught a lot of attention. It was a big campaign. We had posters. We had the video, which has had a lot of hits on the Southwark on the Southwark website. And we launched it on the 25th of November by going to a secondary school in Southwark, in Walworth, and it was a really great experience. We had the assembly with boys at the school, and there's a question and answer session afterwards, and it was really actually very, very worthwhile, and we were really pleased that we did that. And as I said, it's really caused a lot of attention. It's been on the news, etc., and in the press. So that was really a good and a major campaign that actually challenged the way people see this issue. We've also, another success for us was actually working with young people in the information, advice and guidance services. So when we have people who are actually involved or victims of crime, they're looking for support and help immediately that happens. And so this board that we have actually gives information advice there and then to people who are actually involved in violence. And it also gives advice to parents and carers as well. So again, to support and help them to move on. Another success that we've had is, I don't know if you've read about it in the papers, it's the cuckooing, which is criminals taking over people's flats, houses, etc., and just use it for criminality. So we've been successful in the way we tackle that issue, working with the police. So that's been another success for us, that we've been noted for doing good work there. So that's, I'll stop there and ask you for the questions on this first part. Okay.
Yes, I was actually going to suggest that we do keep our questions in the order laid out on the agenda. So if anyone has any questions on the general community safety plan, then please do raise your hands now. I will just kick off with one, if I may. I noted that the statistics on hate crime, and particularly the figure of 70% being racially motivated, very closely mirror the national levels of hate crime. However, the figure given for homophobic hate crime is considerably higher. I believe it's 18% in Southwark as compared to 13% nationally. I wondered if there was any more information available on why that might be. Yeah, I'll leave it at one question from me for now, but should we take a couple of others just to keep things motoring along? Any other questions on the community safety plan? Councillor Foster.
The campaign, the Through Your Eyes campaign, seems like a really commendable piece of work, and I think it's particularly important to be spreading the message amongst young people with the rise of increasing amounts of misogynist far-right rhetoric and the popularity of figures like Andrew Tate. I was just wondering how the success of that education campaign is going to be measured.
Well, for me, as I said, I think that the way it'll be measured is actually seeing a reduction in domestic violence, and some of the things that we saw that was shown in the film, the name calling, the wolf whistling, all that kind of stuff. I'm hoping that will stop, because when we did the question and answer session at the school, which is led by the head teacher, it was really uplifting to see so many boys there saying that we've got sisters, we know about all this, and we think it's wrong, and we're not going to do it, and things like that made me actually feel very, very well pleased that we'd actually tackled it in such a major way. So I hope things like that moving on will actually make diminish the sort of name calling and all the other things that go on at the moment. You've got to start, I think, with our young people, and hopefully things will change to move on. Want to do that? Okay.
Just to follow on that particular point, the plan is that there will be a full evaluation of that campaign before it rolls out. It's still fairly early days. I mean, some amazing results in terms of numbers of views of the video, and having been there at the launch event that Councillor Dixon-File referred to, just the impact it appeared to have on the group of young men in the room was incredible and obvious, and some very skilled teachers there who were able to have a really good discussion about their experience of those sorts of issues. So that was great to see, but that's more anecdotal. But the plan is to do more of a fuller evaluation of it before we then move on to what next. And I think you're absolutely right. It's important that we tackle those low levels, probably not the right word, but the microaggressions that create this culture where misogyny is acceptable, and that it's young men and boys that are the target for that. And so we specifically wanted to do that. Just moving on to the other question. In terms of hate crime, it's difficult to put a finger on what that is. However, it's worth noting, and you see this reflected in the latest census release, which is fairly hot off the press, which demonstrates the size of the community of the LGBTQ plus community in Southwark, and being one of the largest in the country. So there may be some connection with the size of the community, and within that community, a very significant number of people identifying as trans and so on. So it's a big feature of life in Southwark. Hate crime is always difficult. The BCU commander may comment on this when later on the agenda. It's notoriously underreported, and I think that there is a way to go in terms of people's awareness and in terms of encouraging more reporting.
Thank you, Councillor Mwanganje.
Hi, yeah, my question was following on from information that you've both given us. I'm leading on from Sam's question. When you say that you're going to evaluate the effects of the campaign, what I want to know specifically is, have you created a safe space for people to come and report those issues with hate crime, and also with the campaign that you've that is very successful right now? I actually quite like it, but to evaluate, are there any safe spaces that you're going to be able to talk to people so that they can report those things, and so that you are actually correctly evaluating the success of it?
Started by actually rolling this out to other schools. So we're hoping to have a pack that we can give it to other schools and to try it out. So this is like, we're just like a trial, I suppose, really. It's just really early days. It was November.
If I might add to that, there is some information in the report that was circulated about safe spaces and safe havens, and there are a network of those across the borough. The intention is to expand that scheme. They're as much about wider issues of women's safety as they are about domestic abuse, which of course is part of that. But it's this whole approach to thinking about women's safety more widely. So there are spaces there where people can talk about things they experience.
I have a follow-on question, if I may, and I am also going to direct this to Chief Superintendent Wingrove. We spoke to Chief Inspector Boswell about safer neighbourhood teams at our July meeting, and it's a very useful session. One of the observations that we made is that there is no dedicated liaison officer with women and girls, whereas there are liaison officers in respect of, I think, all of the other protected characteristics, or at least most of them. Is that something that's on your radar, that gap, arguably a gap, and is it something that you've been in discussions about to date?
It's not been on my radar, and it would be interesting to find out when that gap occurred, if it's recently or if it's long-standing, or if that role's been deleted or something like that. I don't know, but as I said, probably Inspector Wingrove will be able to advise you on that. But if there isn't, I think that there should be, and I think that we can work in partnership with the police to actually sort of make sure that role comes back on again, because I think that is important. That's well.
Thank you. Any further questions on this part of the report, or shall we move on? Yes, Councillor Hicks.
Just a quick follow-up regarding measurement on the Through Her Eyes campaign. Seems to me that one effective way to measure the impact of that might be on the impact of misogyny if the police were to record it as a hate crime. So I wondered if there'd been any conversations with our partners in the police around encouraging that recording of misogyny as a hate crime.
I personally would be in support of that, but I don't know what how the council would be able to tackle that. Working in partnership, I suppose, really. Yeah.
There have been discussions about that issue, but it is something you may want to come back to later on the agenda.
Thank you. I think we'll move on to the next item in this report. And do I understand that we're going to, with thanks, swap out Stephen for Sharon Ogden? Is that right at this point? Thank you. I can invite Sharon then to come forward. Sharon is the Safer Communities Team Manager. And over to you.
Oh, that's a good start. Thank you. And I can hear me. So you will see the report that I have pulled together, and it kind of has two areas. It focuses on the change of domestic abuse provider from solace to refuge. And then the second part of the report talks about the cost of living crisis in a more general terms in relation to domestic abuse. So if I just kind of start with the change of domestic abuse provider, we actually changed provider on the 6th of February. So we're about 10 days in now. The transition has gone very smoothly. We had 70 referrals transferred from our solace service over. So those consented to come over, and our new provider, as of Monday, had received 50 new referrals. So we're confident that the service is continuing and that the referral routes are there and that people know the new referral pathways. In relation to the actual service, you'll see on the report from point 6 to point 15, give a brief summary of the actual components of the service. Now, what we have done is pretty much a lift and shift, to coin a term. So the service programme support options are exactly the same as they were from the Solace, our previous provider. So we're not changing any of the service options. What is changing slightly is just delivery mechanisms. For example, Bede House are now delivering the counselling and child therapeutic service. I imagine most members here will know Bede House, who are a long-established voluntary sector organisation in the Bermondsey area. So that's a change in delivery mechanism. They are now delivering that. Our perpetrator programme has changed from a group programme to a one-to-one programme. That was partly in discussion with other services and other colleagues who would prefer that kind of mechanism. So there's some slight changes in delivery mechanisms, but the actual service offer is remaining the same. In relation to the contact number remains the same. We've tried to make it as easy as possible to transition. And as I said, we've had new referrals coming in already, so we know that referral mechanism is working. Are there any questions about the new service at this point? And then I'll go on to the cost of living.
Yes, I have one, and I can see two more over there. I saw as part of the previous report that we are progressing in terms of appointing a contractor for the Women's Safety Centre. What will be the crossover, if any, between the services provided by that centre and the services that are now to be provided by Refuge?
The Refuge contract is for a period of 18 months. And the plan being that we are going to recommission the service during that time, so that from August 2024, that's when we will have a new holistic service in place. And in relation to that kind of work, which is looking after the Women's Centre, the plan is to have that staggered over a period of implementation will be over a period of time. We probably won't start on day one with that Women's Centre in place, but there will be a proposal to kind of bring that in place. But that will take part after the 18 months from the Refuge contract.
Thank you. I can see I had hands from Councillor Tester and Councillor Mwanganje, or the other way around if they're being polite to each other.
My question was on the service provider. How does the council intend to use this new change to improve communication of the pathways that are in place with residents who are suffering with such issues? And also collaboration with other local authorities like schools of domestic violence survivor children who are also dealing with this situation. So just to make it clear, how does the council intend to use this new provider and the new plan to make sure that they communicate better with people who are suffering with this issue and make sure that they get the response rate is quicker, and also collaboration with other local authorities such as schools to make sure that this holistic plan is working for our residents?
Okay. I think in the short term, the fact that we have changed a provider is an opportunity to renew our communications. Coming up shortly in March is the International Women's Day, so we'll do some comms around then about the new service. So as I said, I think that on the short term, because we have changed provider, it's a bit of an opportunity to go out and talk to partners again, and also the wider community. As it is, we've kind of done a number of road shows already with key partners, so police, children's services, housing, voluntary sector, to talk about the new Refuge service. So that's kind of that short-term comms there. In relation to, I suppose, the work with schools, we're doing a lot of, as kind of mentioned previously, we're doing some work with schools in relation to the misogyny campaign. So again, I think it's an opportunity to talk about generally what we're doing as well. There's a head teachers, should I say, breakfast meeting. So it's a forum which is already established, of which head teachers regularly meet, and we're going along to that forum in March to talk about the campaign primarily, but I said also be a wider opportunity to talk about the new service. So I think that's the kind of the short-term work. In the longer term, we've now kind of got 18 months to look at the recommissioning of the new service. And in doing that recommissioning piece of work, we will be, and we have done already, we've had done some engagement with different partners, because we want to ask them, what is the need? What do we want? What is missing? And kind of that young people's kind of engagement, involvement has been identified. We want to look at the kind of the cultural aspect of our services. Are we open for all cultures to access? So all these kind of conversations are already happening in relation to that new commissioning for the kind of that new service approach.
I just add that I've seen the pack that the officers have prepared, and that's gone to a lot of our partners out there. And also there's an organisation called Safe Haven, which, although it has an address in New Cross, is actually the person who runs is actually based in Southwark. And so people already getting to know that there's a new provider in Southwark already, and we've already been on the front foot by sending out information and referral forms, etc. Just
touch on your point about working with other boroughs. we're actually doing a joint programme at the moment with some Home Office funding called Safe Streets 4 with Lambeth. So we're working closely with our partners there, and that's about women's safety in public realm, and that's where the Safe Havens initiative, which Stephen mentioned earlier, that's working jointly with Lambeth, and we're looking at having 40 safe havens in place across both boroughs. We're also rolling out sexual harassment training, and it's for street harassment. So we're looking at door security staff, because they are the eyes and ears, linked to the nighttime economy. So it's that awareness raising. And we're discussing that training with a number of the BIDs, the business improvement districts at the moment, and there'll be training offered. So we are doing some kind of joint work with Lambeth in those areas.
Thank you. Councillor Tester.
Thank you. I've got sort of two kind of half questions. So I was wondering, obviously you've mentioned the sort of bead house kind of covering the kind of counselling element. I didn't know if there were any other sort of changes in the delivery mechanism that are worth pointing out, because I think this is very much my own ignorance. You've got the sort of the way in which it's going to be delivered now, but I don't actually know necessarily the way it was done in the past. So I don't know if you're able to identify any of those changes. And then also I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to sort of how success and how kind of a good service from the service provider would look like, so that can be kind of evaluated when we go into kind of recommissioning, if you're able to sort of identify what sort of almost like the KPIs and things like that are.
To touch on about the main changes. So if we look at the survivor support service, where previously we had IDVAs, so independent domestic violence advocates, we've kind of moved to a IGVA, so I get my teeth in, IGVA model, so independent gender violence advocates, and that's looking at a bit more of a broader view, so it's kind of recognising that sexual violence. So that's kind of one of the changes there. Apart from that, the advocacy support and the areas, finance, housing, kind of mental well-being of service users is kind of the same. We do offer survivor group work, a kind of peer group work. That mechanism is changing slightly because it's slightly different copyrighted programs. So Refuge deliver a program called Own My Life, which is 12 weeks, and they'll be running 3 programs in Southwark in a period of 12 months. So that's slightly different than the previous program that Solace did. The perpetrator programme, I think, is probably the biggest difference, in that we're moving from a group work model to a one-to-one model. And I said that was partly with conversation with other partners, children's services, for example, family early help, were quite keen for us to move to that one-to-one model. The reality is with perpetrator programmes, there is still a bit of a question mark as to how they achieve success. It's very much obviously based on the perpetrator showing that insight and openness to change. So what we have done, because we have that group work model previously, by going to a one-to-one model, we can actually compare and contrast to a certain extent, and that will feed into our new commissioning. And I think in relation to the other programs, the Sanctuary, which is the target hardening, locks, etc. premises, that will stay exactly the same. The Iris, working with GPs, that will stay exactly the same. So, as I said, the counselling and child therapeutic, it's a different provider, Bead House. So again, it will be slightly different, but it's still one-to-one. So that won't be changing a great deal. So there's just a few changes. There's not anything really major.
But I think we can reassure you there will be evaluations as we go along.
Absolutely. And in relation to just touch on the key KPIs, quite a lot of work when we were looking to move to the change of provider, we obviously had to look at outputs and outcomes and what we're looking at. So there's a whole set of KPIs in relation to each of the individual service areas. So, for example, the survivor support, it's about reduction in risk. It's improvement in their kind of well-being, knowledge of where to access help. There's also KPIs. We're looking at approximately 1,500 referrals a year, of which we expect 60% to accept help. because obviously it's a offer of consent or support by consent. So those are the parameters. So that works about 900 a year, and that works out about 110 caseload per week for, which is Safe Lives. That's kind of the guidance. So there's been a lot of work kind of done in what our referral rates are, what we expect to see. But also there's that flexibility built into the contract that we do expect Refuge to adapt and change if we see any significant changes, etc. So we are, we're having weekly meetings at the moment to look at referrals, look at what's coming through, see who's accessing, etc., etc. But we will have the flexibility to adapt as we go through.
Thank you. Ina, Nolita? And I've got one and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to apologize because I have quite difficult to understand this change of the supplier. For how long have you Southwark work with Solis? Have they failed to deliver any sort of services? Because everything I hear is the same service or is slightly differently with no significant difference of outcome. So longer someone would work with a supplier, better the relationship is, and better is an improvement and a tangible result to be negotiated. But they just change it for the sake of changing without having any different outcome, either financially, because I don't know if it's cheap or not, or having different results. I'm not sure about the consistency of the people who get the services would have. So I'm not very clear about why it was a decision financially operational or if it was any failure. Did you give any warnings to the previous suppliers of failure? What is the context? Thank you.
Okay, in summary, there through the contract monitoring process, there was some issues in relation to the data presented, identified. That is currently subject to audit process. So I can't speak any further about that at that moment, but that was the issue which rose, from which the decision was made at senior level within the council that we would move away from Solis and go to
Is
Refuge.
data relating to financials or just data like personal data?
Can I just remind members to wait to be called on for asking follow-up questions?
I apologize.
It was just in relation, said some of the outputs and outcomes data that we receive, there were some inconsistencies in how that was being provided, and we raised some questions which identified, so there were some challenges from the provider's side in how they were calculating different areas. So that was there were the inconsistencies in the data which we weren't happy with.
Thank you. I can see I've got two further questions over here. Can I just clarify that those questions are about this bit of the agenda, so specifically on the change of providers? So we are going to move on to the sort of more general question of the impact of the cost of living crisis. I think I did see Bassie's hand first.
Thank you. I think mine is just a question around our community, the type of people we have within the community, and what do we have in place that will help them to take up some of the services that are available, because there are some bit of the community may want, maybe for cultural reason, they may want to not to come forward. Meanwhile, they are going through some of these issues. So how do we intend to promote reach out to this kind of people to come forward?
I think to start the answer is that, first of all, there's obviously the council commissions Refuge as our domestic abuse provider, but there are many other organisations already delivering services in Southwark. So obviously BEAD, we have Latin American Women's Rights Service, who are obviously linking in with that cultural group. So we already link in with other organisations and try and improve and find out what the barriers are to reporting. We do have part of the contract with Refuge that they do some community outreach and training. And this is partly why we're kind of monitoring the data that comes through. So part of their monitoring will be looking at protected characteristics, because we want to see who, you know, the ethnic background of the people that are accessing our services. We want to, you know, ensure that the LGBTQ plus community is accessing services. So we will have that data collection to identify where there may be a need and where that's not coming through. And then what we'll be doing is, as I said, Refuge, we can do some community outreach. First of all, linking in with other groups, but also we can actually target specific communities to find out what the barriers are. But I think it's a work in progress, I would say. So also, we're actually looking to our posters, we're looking to put them in different languages as well. So again, that help people access our services.
And I think also this is quite a big issue in many communities, as you've identified. And the one I've come across just recently is specialising in working with women of African origin. And I'm meeting with them early next week. They want to talk about what they can provide, and I'm happy to listen to them. So yeah, so there are other groups always coming forward, which I hope will help.
Councillor Morganji? Okay, sure, no problem. See Councillor Foster's hand just then.
I was just wanted to touch on the question that Ina asked, which referred to the finances. I was wondering if there is any cost implications to the change in provider.
No, it's the short answer. It's within the budgeted amounts that we'd had. Yeah, it's yeah, there's no.
I think it was another question from Ina.
It's just a follow up, because my question has not been answered satisfactorily. I would say it was a referral to data, but my question was very specific, if it's about the service level or it's about financials. The reason I'm asking this question is that unfortunately Southwark has an issue with monitoring its contractors. So it's not only in this area, but it's a wider issue. So what I want to come to bottom with, how long did it take Southwark to identify that there have been some issues with the service delivery, and was it any financial involvement in this, in the sense that money was taken without the service being delivered?
Unfortunately, I can't answer that in any detail at this point because it's subject to audit processes at this time. So I don't think I can provide you more comment about that at the moment.
Can we sort of clarify that service was being provided? There's no gap in the service, as I understand.
Oh, no. Service delivery is being maintained.
Just to clarify, the item on the agenda is about the change of the provider and whether or not there's been any impact. It isn't the role of this committee to undertake the audit process that's been referred to. So we do need to keep those two things distinct. If you have a follow-up question that's about the potential impact of the change, I'm happy to take a further one. Otherwise, I think we probably do need to move on. Okay, if we can move on then to the last bit of the report, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the cost of living, which is kind of from points 22 until 28 in the report. I think just to start with, I did approach a number of providers to say, is there data? And unfortunately, there isn't. So I think just to highlight that the most of the information in the report there is kind of anecdotal. Service providers, they are obviously aware and they are starting to collect data, but you know, they cannot put their finger on it at this point with any great detail. So anecdotally, what the service providers are kind of telling us is that financial hardship, they're directing more people to food banks. So that financial hardship is one of the areas they've seen. And in relation to domestic abuse, there's like a non-molestation order, which people can take out, costs about £900. So there's that financial deterrent, if you like. So as people have less money, there is a financial impact there. Also, what the providers are identifying is that perpetrators are using the kind of economic abuse element. There's a case study in the paper which talks about a survivor who successfully left the perpetrator and was furloughed during COVID. And the perpetrator was originally coming in and putting money on the electric meter, but only putting it on there when he was there and then letting it run down when he left. So it was a means for him to come back into the property because he was, you know, she had heat and light, etc. when he was there, and he was withholding it when he left. So there is a kind of a means of control element that kind of people are reporting. As I said, the main element is that kind of financial aspect, and there's a recognition that it's actually preventing survivors from fleeing. And I did speak to our housing services because obviously housing was an element that was identified, and they aren't seeing a great impact at the moment. There's nothing again they can point to. I mean, apart from the hardship, you know, they are, you know, acknowledging that some of our tenants are seeing increased hardship, but we're not seeing, you know, greater numbers fleeing because, as I said, people can't afford to flee in that respect. So there's nothing coming through, but I think it's a case of being very much aware of the situation, as monitoring and seeing what we can do. All our providers are aware of the various hardship funds that the council offers, and it's signposting, and it's doing as much as we can.
Can I just add that at Sadiq Khan, the London Mayor, there's a team in his office which are working on actually getting together some evidence to actually write up and share with the London Council. So yeah, it's early days really when you think about what's happened so far. But there is, I've heard there is talk about having some research done and actually having a book produced by the London Mayor.
Thank you. I think that research will be very much appreciated. I did want to jump straight into the question around the observation made at paragraph 23. So I do recognise that we wouldn't necessarily see an increase in cases approaching us if the point is that that survivors are unable to flee, are unable to leave their homes. But what we would surely expect to see in those circumstances is an increase in the seriousness. We know that domestic abuse is a crime that's characterised by escalation. So what I would be interested to know, what doesn't seem to be in the report, is whether or not there's been an increase in the number of cases assessed as high risk. There's no mention of the MARAC in this report, for example. Is there anything more you can say on that?
The MARAC, I mean, I think it's just important to put it in context in that the cost of living obviously came on the back of COVID, and we'd seen a 21% increase in referrals during COVID for domestic abuse. That was to our services, so that's not police recorded. That was just our survivors approaching services, and we did see an increase in the element of high risk during COVID. Now, that was kind of for the year 2021, the kind of the first lockdown, that May of that first period. We went from an average of high 20s, early 30s referrals to MARAC a fortnight to 40 a fortnight. So we did see that increase, and that high risk. It was that proportion of high risk cases. Now, in relation to the MARAC, we have 31 cases at the next meeting, so our figures have gone down. They have gone back down to the pre-COVID levels. So I guess to answer your question is that at the moment, that kind of high risk element doesn't seem to be impacted by the cost of living. As I said, it's still slightly higher than our base rate in 2018-19, but yeah, the cost of living doesn't seem to be having a particular impact on that high risk. And I think it's probably just worth noting here as well that what I didn't touch on, the section here about domestic abuse statistics, is that the kind of long-term trend is that there are reported domestic abuse offences, that's police reported offences, we are improving. I think 2013-14 we were about the 5th highest volume borough in London. We're now around about 15. So long term are kind of our offences, and our reported domestic abuse levels are decreasing.
Thank you. That was actually going to be the basis of my second question. I've got an eye out for the questions. Do we cross-refer the police recorded statistics with the crime survey for England and Wales, which obviously is self-reporting, so also includes where people say they've been a victim of crime but they've not reported it to the police? Are we sure that those figures are telling the same story from both sources?
I must admit, I didn't look at it for this report. That's something I can do, because as you recognise, the crime statistics don't reveal everything. But so apologies, I haven't got an answer to that.
Thank you.
I just add also that in my inbox, this is just anecdotal, my inbox as a councillor, I have received quite a large increase in numbers of people emailing to say, I'm homeless because of DA, or I want to leave my partner because of DA. So they're all going straight through to the director of housing, because I think it was really important. So there is that as well. I mean, it might be something we could do to ask the councillors across the board. Has their emails and their requests for help increased because of domestic violence? And also the information that you asked for, Ellie, I mean, Chair, we could provide that at a later date for the committee.
Yeah, absolutely. I could look at. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any further questions from members on this? Yes, Councillor Ganjay.
I'm glad you brought up the statistics. That's what my question was going to be about. And I wanted to link it to what we were talking about previously, but then also with the impact of the cost of living crisis and the pandemic. It says that there was an 118% increase in the number of referrals to the council, to the council's commissioned DA service. I just wanted to know, how has that impacted the council's response rate to deal with these issues? I think it kind of links into what I'd previously asked before, but I just want to know, is the council under strain, and is the response rate what it should be? And are we able to see figures on the response rate? Because then this also goes back to what Councillor Dixon-Fowl was saying. As a councillor, I've received information about these cases and how they're being dealt with. So I just want to know if we're able to get some more information on that. I hope that was clear.
That's right. I mean, during COVID, what we actually did is we put extra resource in. So additional funding was made available. So we had that additional IDFA resource from Solace at the time, who held the contract. So we did, because we had a 21% increase during COVID. So quite quickly, we were able to increase resource to make sure that help was available, or IDFA support was available. And we also made sure that a lot of our information on our signpost and our website, all that information was there and up to date. We've obviously been monitoring the figures. We get quarterly figures from providers, and I said with the new contract we'll be monitoring more closely. And I mentioned the figure of 1,500 earlier, so that's what our annual expectation is of survivors that will approach, and the new refuge service has been commissioned at that level. So that's the most recent data, that's the most recent figures we have. So we are confident that the provision we have, sorry, I'm not sure I mentioned, we have 8 IGVAs attached to the service. We're confident that that will be able to support, but as I said, it's just a case for us monitoring and making sure it does.
Can I just, oh, sorry. I was going to say, I wonder, I mean, because this is housing and community safety scrutiny, I wonder if we could ask the Cabinet Member for Housing if we are monitoring how many people, how many women apply for, on the basis of wanting to move because of domestic violence. I don't know the answer to that question. But it'd be interesting to see if housing actually keep a log of it themselves. And also, do they, I mean, people can apply and say, I'm applying because of domestic violence, but how many people does the council actually accept and take in and offer them accommodation? I don't know, but something we should, I think.
That's a good point. We're actually, because we recognise that housing is a key issue, is one of the highest issue which survivors have. So we actually have a full-time IDFA, actually within Housing Solutions, and that's been in with the previous contract and will continue with the new contract. So they're there so that housing officers can directly refer as soon as they have someone approach them. And we're looking at roughly a caseload of 200 to 250 cases a year for that role. So that gives a slight indication of potential demand, because that's based on previous demand.
Yeah. Oh yeah, just one last follow-up from what you said. I know from the other commissions we've been able to receive statistics about response rates for calling in the call center response rates. So I was wondering if there would be any way for us to get those statistics from your team, just to see how quickly people are responding to these issues, the same way that we're able to see the call center's response rate.
So just to clarify, when you mean response rates, do you mean
essentially how, so a person comes in to report that they need domestic violence assistance, either that be housing or what have you, how quickly are they able to be signposted to the relevant services? How quickly are they able to get rehoused in temporary accommodation because they're fleeing from domestic violence? Essentially the quickness in which we are able to provide the services and not leave people wondering whether or not their life is in jeopardy, if that makes any sense.
Okay, I'll have to speak to housing colleagues to see where we sit with that. So with the actual contract, we have certain service delivery measures and requirements. So for example, it's actually, I can send, there's a presentation which I can circulate. So I just have a copy here. And within this, it's the service standards which Refuge have to make. For example, they have to make the first contact within 24 hours of receiving a referral. They have to do an assessment, and that first contact within 24 hours is that risk assessment, immediate risk assessment. And that's, they then have to complete and work, a needs assessment needs to be completed within 5 days. So there's certain service standards within that Refuge contract and how they approach survivors in relation to that risk. But I think what you're talking more is about the outcomes, as in once we've had the assessment and their needs are identified, is how long that takes. It will be something I will have to put my thinking cap on, but probably an interesting exercise to do. I'm not sure it's something we've done before, but I will look into that.
That would be incredibly helpful. And could we also add to it the point that Councillor Dixon-File referenced, the whether or not we actually can get the numbers of people who say they want to move as a result of domestic abuse, and then how many actually are moved. I'm going to ask another question on this. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to add to the previous answer, which is that when people turn up at, as it used to be, Bournemouth Road, say I'm homeless, I've got children here, and it's domestic violence, it's quite quick that the actual people on duty, that staff on duty, actually ask for proof. I don't know what proof they'd ask for, but they ask for proof and ask for, dates of birth and all this kind of stuff, and they offer temporary accommodation. But I think that the clue is what happens to that family then? Do they get given down the line permanent housing? Because I believe, and it's just anecdotal as well, because people come back and they'll say, well, I've got 2 nights temporary bed and breakfast, but now I'm out and I'm being told I can't either apply or I won't get given proper, permanent tenancy with the council. So there is 2 particular distinct ways, and I think we should be monitoring both, actually. And I think it's something we should be asking officers to do, but from housing, I think, yeah.
Thank you. I'm just aware that we do have to take the supplementary report on antisocial behaviour as well. Just before we move on to that, I just got one final question on sort of this group of issues. I'm just conscious we moved on very quickly from the question of the Women's Safety Centre. Is there any more that you would like to say on that, or can say on that at this point?
I think the answer is not a great deal at this point. So some initial research has been done and kind of looked at other models or existing models. There's the Orange House in Amsterdam, which is a model that we have looked at, which has been replicated in Sussex. I think Littlehampton. So we have done some preliminary research and we've looked at different models, and as that continues.
Yes, I can just add that that is absolutely true. At the moment, we're talking about it in Cabinet, and we want to bring it to group to talk about that and talk to anybody else who is interested in and listen to what we're thinking about. But it's at the moment, it's not actually confirmed that we're going to do one or another model, or not at all.
Or not at all. It's,
It has to come to the group.
okay.
We have to bring information to you. And, yeah.
Okay, could we now take the supplementary agenda item on antisocial behaviour, which members will have in a separate pack? Oh, thank you very much, Sharon. Are we having Stephen Douglas back? Excellent. Is there anything you wanted to speak to in this report, or should we just take it as read and go straight into questions?
Apologies, I'll just say a couple of things which are set out in the report. It's a very similar story to the previous question on domestic abuse. It's early days. The evidence does suggest some increase, and so we are taking action on what we predict will happen. But it's a very, very similar story, and some of that is set out in the report at paragraph 13, just in terms of how we're changing the offer, or proposing changing the offer in response to an increase. But we expect it to happen, but it's early days as yet.
Thank you. And we have made the distinction in the previous item between the impact of the cost of living crisis and then the cost of COVID, which to some extent we're still coming out of. Is there anything more to be said on that, on what the picture was during the height of the COVID crisis?
I think COVID, you did see a fairly significant increase in reporting of noise, kind of neighbour nuisance issues, which is kind of obvious, really. People spending more time at home and therefore more likely to be reporting those or experiencing those sorts of issues. So there was certainly an increase through that COVID period.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions on this from members? Councillor Foster?
I had quite a high-level question about the council's overall approach to the issue of antisocial behaviour, just a sort of attitude towards it. You can see from the categories which divide up different kinds of antisocial behaviour that it's quite a broad term that covers everything from physical violence to fly tipping. And so I was just wondering how the council sees this approaching the issue kind of in general, and what is a successful strategy around antisocial behaviour, because in some respects it's counterintuitive to imagine that those are the same types of problem, or that it's sort of helpful to categorise something which is at the level of a minor nuisance, alongside something which is like a very serious harm, like violence or something like that. So that's my question.
I was just going to say that antisocial behaviour, no matter how mean we see it, I mean, if it affects somebody, I mean, I just dealt with a case this afternoon where somebody was just complaining and actually writing in the email that he's had enough. He's going to go down himself and sort out somebody kicking football in a games cage. Some people, that's nothing. They're out of the house all day. But this particular case was that just kids were it's half term, for goodness sakes, and they're playing football. But it is a good question, actually. Maybe we should be looking at it a bit more closely, actually, because so many people, actually, their lives are destroyed because of it. What can we do? And I think I'd like to hear your ideas, because, we should be taking this further, really. It's not good enough just to shrug it off. I don't think, anyway.
Councillor Hicks.
Thank you. I just had a question regarding the expectation that youth antisocial behaviour will increase. I just wondered if you could say a bit more about how the council is working with local partners, particularly schools, to tackle that potential issue and getting in there early to try and tackle that potential increase. Thank you.
There is work takes place with schools across the borough, and also with other youth providers on all of this. Some of this is about positive activities for young people, and there are things that are funded through things like the Positive Futures Fund, that also touch on people who are vulnerable to getting involved in more criminal behaviour. But there's a lot of work with other providers to address some of those things. And as this develops, we'll see what the implications are and what we need to do differently as a result of that.
Can I just also add, I think that it's something we should be looking at, because the response rate, I think somebody mentioned about the response rate. The response rate, I think, should be based on how severe it is, the nuisance is. So if they're all labelled, categorised the same, I don't think that helps at all.
Thank you. I did just want to pick up on the question of numbers. I think there is a contrast in terms of the actual statistics in this report as compared to the previous item. Other than the reference to 800 requests for the SASBU service on an annual basis, there isn't a lot of information available, particularly on those cases that aren't referred to the unit. They're handled by the case officer. I do recognise that antisocial behaviour is a very difficult thing to monitor for the very reason that it's split between multiple different responsible bodies. Do we have that information, those statistics, and are we able to get hold of them for the purposes of our scrutiny?
We could circulate that to yourselves afterwards.
That would be really helpful. And maybe as a follow-up, I do, of course, recognise that we have to have categorisation in relation to antisocial behaviour. And it's right that graffiti, fly tipping, etc., are in the lowest category. At the same time, it is possible to have, racist graffiti. So are we also, or homophobic graffiti or whatever it might be? Are we? Do we also have the figures to tell us how much antisocial behaviour is also potentially a hate incident, be it a crime or a non-crime incident?
Yes, that should, because the response rate is I think within 24 hours. Immediate, yeah.
So. Sorry, just let me follow up on that, because I have understood from what's in front of us that it's it has to be category 1 to get the 24-hour response. But would that include graffiti if it were racist graffiti?
Yes.
Okay, so that would make it a category 1 incident.
Yes.
Right. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, if we could have the figures on overall incidents that doesn't go to the unit, and then how much of all of it is potentially a crossover with other types of with crime incidents and non-crime incidents, that would be very, very helpful. Any other questions on this report? Okay, I think that means we can thank you very much for the hour you've spent in front of us, as well as all the time that I'm sure went into the reports, and Sharon as well, thank you. And we will now ask for our next item, our next speaker to come forward. Thank you very much, Councillor Dixon-Farr, Stephen Douglas and Sharon Ogden. Could I please welcome and invite Chief Superintendent Colin Grove to come forward, please? Okay, that's good. And I think just before we get started, I understand that although this is the first opportunity that this iteration of the Commission has had to interview you, it will also, sadly for us, be our last, because you are moving on to pastures new. So can I congratulate you on that on behalf of the Commission? I don't know if there's anything you wanted to let us know about either your successor or any words you had on your 3 years, I believe, in the role.
Well, firstly, Chair and Larissa, firstly, thank you for extending the invite for me to attend
and to be able to sort of address you and answer your questions. It's always a pleasure to do so, and always happy to, and have done in the past. And I am indeed sad to go, so thank you for your words. It has been 3 years. You've been it's an amazing borough to work and police and to serve, and so it's been a real honour and a privilege to do so. My successor is Detective Chief Superintendent Seb Ajay-Ado, who comes from North area, so Haringey and Enfield, in a public protection role. And I just really listening, and I'll perhaps cover it in some of my opening remarks around violence against women and girls and domestic abuse and so on. So I think for me, it's really welcome that we have someone with a public protection background as a leader for the borough in terms of policing, and to help support that agenda even further and take on the excellent work that we've been doing alongside the council and other partners in this case. So he starts on Monday, and we've already started our handover. My real duty and responsibility is to make sure that is as smooth as it possibly can be, because we really want to build and continue, and to experience the least amount of disruption, if you like, in those relationships, and just build on things. So I'm really delighted for his appointment. I'm going to wish him all the best of luck and continue to support him as he gets to know everybody, and dare say looks forward to attending here in the future.
Thank you. Look forward to it too. I don't know if there are any initial remarks you wanted to make, or whether you'd like to move straight into questions. I'm
making some initial remarks. If that's helpful, I won't keep it too long.
No, that would be fine. I was obviously going to say that what you may wish to do is speak to any of the items that came up under the previous part of the agenda. I'm sure you would have opinions on all of it.
Yeah, thank you. And if I miss anything, then I'm sure they will come up in the questions as well. So I think the first thing we need to start to talk about it is obviously the new commissioner has now been in post for some time, and the turnaround plan was recently launched for public consultation. And then this really describes the policing priorities, the commissioner's priorities to have more trust, less crime, and high standards in policing across London, and to improve our service delivery through partly culture change, through engagement, through crime fighting, through working with communities, through working with partners, and various other aspects. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to see that. And I think there's things towards the end of March, there's an opportunity to comment and provide feedback. I think there's a real good opportunity for the public to be able to do so and really shape. So I think one of the things that struck me, and something that's certainly important to me, is making sure that we don't police to communities, we police with communities, and with community support, with consent, and also co-produce plans and responses to things. So I think as the bedrock of neighbourhood policing, community policing is part of that plan. I think there's some real optimism in terms of some of the things that we will see in the borough over the coming year and beyond. So I think just touching on that, one of the priorities in the turnaround plan is around strengthening neighbourhood policing. So part of that is increasing, for example, the number of PCSOs in London. So the mayor has already signed off an additional 500 PCSOs, which, whilst I don't know the exact detail of how that will benefit Southwark, I'm confident that obviously that it will. Last year, for example, we benefited from an additional 14 PCs, police constables, as dedicated ward officers in some of our high crime wards in the borough, and they have been deployed. So I'm confident that we'll see some additional PCSOs alongside that. So I think that's really, really good news for residents and partnership working. Together with that, there will also be an increase in senior leadership in neighbourhood policing in London. And so there'll be an increase of one superintendent per borough in London. So at the moment in Lambeth and Southwark, we have one Dan Ivy. So we'll have two Dan Ivies in effect. So we're just finalising the recruitment process for that, and we'll be able to announce some further details into who those individuals will be, and make sure that they are inducted into the borough. But that will increase capacity, partnership working, community engagement, and all the things around increasing trust, reducing crime, and raising standards. So, and then what we'll have ultimately around about April time this year is a named superintendent supported by a chief inspector. You already have Tom Cornish, your local safe neighbourhood inspector, and more details around the range of officers across the different wards. So for me, it represents a really strong offer in terms of that, our ability to strengthen that neighbourhood policing. I think the second area, and it's really, you spend a lot of time on it in the previous interview, is around violence against women and girls. And in the turnaround plan is a commitment to strengthen public protection in London. And we've worked incredibly hard and had an excellent relationship, partnership relationship with many organisations, obviously including the council, and it's part of our community safety refresh around how we strengthen violence against women and girls and our approach to that. So again, as a commissioner's commitment to do that, I think will be really key, and we'll see further announcements, I think, in terms of what that may mean locally. But I just wanted to sort of touch on some key areas, just listening to the previous session, that may be helpful for the committee. We've really focused, and I've spoken about it here and in other sessions before, around prioritising violence against women and girls on our borough in terms of our policing approach. Post the murder of Sarah Everard and the work that we've done together really successfully around Home Office bids for safer streets, for example. And Operation Vigilant, which is now a London-wide and now been seen nationally, which is trialled using best practice from Thames Valley here in Southwark around our hotspots. But also in terms of the support we provide to victim survivors and the work that we do with services such as Solace and now Refuge. So at the moment, we look at a number of KPIs. And some of those are around how we improve the practice of our officers in relation to, for example, referring high-risk cases into merit, to use of measures such as domestic violence prevention orders, how they use their body-worn cameras in interviews, how their response times, and almost a philosophy around DA in a day. So making sure that we respond to calls from the public and to victims within quickly, but actually trying to see through the start to finish of a particular case within a 24-hour period, and to really try and strengthen our approach, not only in terms of practice, but also just in terms of prioritisation of domestic abuse, for example. And what we've seen is increased improvements, and we've measured that in a number of ways. But a key measure is our sanction detection rate, so the number of cases that we charge perpetrators of domestic abuse, which has gone from 7% last year to 15% as we stand. And we had the best performance in London in terms of domestic abuse sanction detection outcomes. And that will continue in terms of our approach, and some of that also relies on engagement with CPS. The other element around violence against women is around rape. I think I've mentioned here previously around our high levels of rape offending in the borough. And Operation Vigilant was in response to some of that, and making sure that the focus is around the perpetrators and let's be honest, they're often male perpetrators. And so we did see a slight decrease in the level of offending. But I think the other element is what we do when we receive those allegations, which is incredibly important to get right. And there's been a lot of scrutiny in the past around how police services support victim survivors of rape, for example. So we've taken on board national research and engaged for an operation called Bluestone Soteria, which is actually an academic evidence-based approach to improve practice by police. And we've been one of the early adopters of that, to really try and strengthen and change mindsets, really, in terms of focusing on the perpetrator rather than focusing, for example, on examining the history of a victim survivor, someone reporting. And actually, the focus should be on the perpetrator and making sure we bring them to justice and wrap around the support we can with victim survivors who have bravely come forward to report. And so again, working with different organisations, working with the CPS, one of the ways we've measured that progress has been, again, the increase in our sanction detection rate, which has gone from 2.3% last year, which is incredibly low, to nearly 10% as we currently stand. So a large increase in outcomes. Again, that represents the best outcome rate in London at the moment. And we continue to strengthen what we do in terms of either officer numbers, ensuring the teams are fully staffed, training and that continued sort of examination and reflection around the mindset to make sure we're getting that right in terms of our practice. So so I just wanted to sort of highlight those two things. And then I think the last thing I just want to highlight before I pause, because I did say I'd keep it brief and I kind of misled you a little bit, Chair. So, but you should know me by now. I do like to talk. I think the other areas around hate crime that you talked about, and I think one of the questions was thinking about the how we buck the trend in terms of LGBTQ+ hate crime reporting, how it's gone up compared to nationally. And I'm not, I haven't really got a solid answer for that, but I think one of the things that we have done, because we know that, like in a lot of cases around hate and around DA and others, it's really, often people experience it so many times before people have the confidence to come forward and report these things. And Dan Ivey sort of reflecting following the East London inquests into the death of, into the homicides committed against gay men, worked with LGBT+ representatives, community groups and others to form a community reference group in the borough, an action plan, and we went early with creating a LGBT+ engagement and activities officer, Hayley Jones, who performs that role. And really that's really trying to strengthen our approach, make sure that officers are informed and educated and are thoughtful around these issues, engage and reach out into different communities to encourage reporting. So I think, and that has been going for nearly a year. So I think part of that we would have seen some increase in reporting, I think, through that process. And there have been some high profile cases which we have then solved, which again will help to provide confidence to people that have come forward. So we're trying to build on that, and we know that the Met are now looking to copy some of that good practice that's been developed here. So I just wanted to highlight that and highlight our commitment there. And I think that there was a question whether we should also have an engagement officer for org or gender-based crime. Apologies, I can't remember. So we haven't had an officer in that role. Certainly something we can take away and reflect. Obviously, I wasn't part of the conversation with Steve Boswell. I suppose one of my reflections around that, if I think about our resources and our leads around org and around gender-based crime, we have quite a substantial amount of resource and work that we do with partners in that space. I think Claire Kelland has been our org lead, so we've had a senior lead with violence against women for some time, and really trying to accelerate a lot of the work in relation to that, into that. And there's been intersections around gender-based crime and so on within that. And I think there's a point just around misogyny as a hate crime. So there is a Met policy position that we wouldn't record misogyny as a hate crime. And I think I've probably mentioned before that obviously we would always treat calls from women reporting issues seriously. We would always look at what crime and other ways of reporting and dealing with perpetrators there were that we could deal with, whether it's public order offences and other things. And my expectation would be, if I think about some of the learning from places like Nottingham, for example, some of the cases that were reported there were sort of choose my words carefully, really. I don't want to use the word low level because it can be low level but high impact. Things like comments in the street and those. Sometimes it was just simply an officer having a word with someone, changed their behaviour, dealt with it, and the person reporting it was really happy with it because it meant someone took it seriously and intervened. So it wouldn't necessarily be a crime in that recorded sense. So there are those messages that we look at internally in terms of our internal culture. We're doing things around gender equality allies and doing a lot of work around our internal culture around misogyny. And again, I think some of that will help to shape or frame officers' minds in terms of tackling these issues. And obviously I applaud the council's work in relation to the innovative video that was launched recently as well. So, and something that we'll take on board and you'll probably and be sharing to some of our officers as well. So I thought I'd just touch on those three things and I'll pause there because I'm sure there's lots of questions.
Thank you. Please note we gave no commitment to be brief. I will just pick up on the last on the point around violence against women and girls and the question of either a liaison officer or indeed making or recording misogynistic hate crime. I don't think the point of either of those things is necessarily that without them, these incidents wouldn't be dealt with. I think the question is whether or not we are robbing ourselves of the opportunity to understand the scale. And the concern that I think many people would have around the not going down the path of recording misogyny as a hate crime. It's not that, as you say, street harassment or whatever it might be wouldn't be dealt with. It's that it wouldn't be recognised as being related to a protected characteristic. Whereas if it were another protected characteristic, it would be recognised. Is that a concern that you have, given that obviously we need to appreciate the scale of different types of offence in order to respond to them properly? And then I suppose that the secondary point is it does seem strange in the wake of some of the cases that you've mentioned, that the very serious case of Sarah Everard and many others, it does seem strange that of all the protected characteristics, it is women and girls that don't have a dedicated liaison officer, which again would be for that lower level type of incident. Are you concerned about that?
I'm concerned if the public are concerned, because my duty is to serve and to respond to concerns raised and to think about how our service needs to be shaped. As I say at the very beginning, we want to police with communities. So I certainly wouldn't dismiss anything, because I think it would be really important just to thoughtfully listen to the feedback that people give us and how we can shape and benefit our service as a result. And I think I think part of the response earlier was around actually taking that back in terms of the partnership to see what could be provided or could be thought through. I think the other bit, so if I think about some of the work that other liaison officers do, some of it is around engagement, some of it is around providing advice to officers, some of it is around promoting activities, to signpost things for services that we may have or others may have. And I think we probably have, just through the VORG work that we do, for example, quite a lot of service in that space compared to perhaps other protected characteristics. So if I think about some of the work we do around, so we regularly have done partnership stands and stalls in places like London Bridge Station and Peckham and other places like that. We regularly do campaigns. The Met does locally around domestic abuse, so Ask Angela, various other sort of campaigns that promote and signpost services and support. And if you think about the profile of domestic abuse, sex offending that we have on in the borough, the majority of victim survivors are women. And so our public protection services are geared accordingly. And so working with organisations such as Refuge and Solace and Gaia, for example, and our ISVAs and so on, there's a lot of support in place to understand the scale of VORG offences, and B, to provide a service or signpost services and do that outreach that we do successfully together. So it's not to say that there's not more that we can do, and there may be benefit to having a single person that could do some of that. But the way we've structured it is we have a senior lead, we have a VORG action plan, we have VORG working groups aligned to community safety, and we have a number of officers within the borough working with partners, doing a range of activities under the action plan to service a lot of that need that in other areas a single officer might do. So it's just trying to really think through thoughtfully how much extra value that may add. But so I wouldn't dismiss it, and I think it's something, as colleagues before have said, we can take away and have a think about.
Thank you. I'll just follow up, and then I can see I've got other questions to come. I mean, I do recognise that there's an enormous amount of resource that goes into particular areas of violence against women and girls. The domestic abuse sector has always been very well supported, I think, and better supported than other areas of VORG. The concern that I've got, as I say, is around being able to make the links between lower level misogynistic incidents, and then the ones that have always been recognised as more serious, either domestic or sexual offending. And that's not just a question, I think, of being able to understand the incidents. It is also about recognising that these will often be the same perpetrators. You know, that the man who yells sexist abuse in the street probably doesn't then go on to behave peerlessly towards women in other areas of his life, including particularly potentially his domestic relationships. It's not irrelevant, I think, that the killer of Sarah Everard, and in other cases, like I'm thinking Libby Squires, not in London, in Hull, but the same principle. These offenders who went on to commit the most serious of crimes started out with indecent exposure and so on. So if we're not making the link between, if we're not noting misogyny in the round, it's not just that we're missing the whole picture, it is also potentially that we're missing the opportunity to prevent some of that escalation. So I'm aware I'm asking you the same question.
No, that's fine. No, I've got I suppose, additional from the answer I've given before. So I think it's a really important point, absolutely, you know, because we have to think about the environment that we live in and create, and is that environment hostile enough, for want of a better phrase, for individuals who are either being misogynistic, sexist, racist, and so on. And you're right, you know, there's behaviours that go unchallenged that need to be. So I think there's a couple of bits. So one is, and it probably links into some of the trust and confidence question, which is, traditionally, we've measured our trust and confidence that the public have in us through the Public Attitude Survey, which MOPAC commissioned with Ipsos Mori. We're currently using another survey by an organisation called Zen City, which has pop-up, comes up on your mobile phone. It extracts data in a really simple way, and it gives us you know, information about how people feel about their local areas, and we can then split that data out around gender, sex, race, age, and so on, and then examine the types of issues that, in this case, for example, women are coming forward with. I don't have the answer for you here, but what I can commit to, and we can take that back into the partnership, is to examine the data that we're getting through that, because we're getting many hundreds of responses through that, because it's quick and simple and easy. It's not a lengthy survey. So I think there is some further data that we haven't had previously, which may help to fill in some of those gaps in that question. I think the other bit is to think other areas such as walk and talk scheme, for example, which continues, is now met wide and being picked up nationally as well. And that continues. We still continue with many walk and talks locally with local neighbourhood officers, promoted women, and again, it creates those conversation spaces. At the end of those walk and talks, we evaluate it with a survey, so that we can then capture that data, the locations, and then again also bring that data back into partnership conversations around how women feel, what we could be doing more, and so on. So as I say, it's I think everyone's on the same page in terms of trying to have the very best outcome, create a very safe space to tackle largely male perpetrators of violence against women. And really think about what extra we can do to do that, because there's we always want to strive to improve. So, as I say, we can take some of that back into the partnership, and then perhaps my successor can come back to let you know how it's going on.
Thank you. I think I should hand over to other members. I saw Councillor Foster's hand, and yes, I did see Councillor Morgan's hand.
Thanks very much. So the murder of Sarah Everard has come up a couple of times, of course, was killed by a police officer. And I was wondering if you could touch on some of that aspect of the work that the Met has to do. There have obviously been a few other high profile failings recently, and some very serious cases. And I think a lot of the time the conversation around this is framed in terms of trust, but clearly that's not the whole picture, because that's only to do with a relationship or kind of perceptions of the police. But there's also the more sort of concrete matter of how the police actually behaves, the harms that are caused by police officers. And I was wondering if you could talk to your own experience of the culture of the Met, where you see that the failings are now, whether it's a lot of resistance to cultural change, because a lot of the problems that are arising now that are causing people to lose trust in the police are not new. I mean, many of them mirror types of issues, some of them very high profile historically. So yeah, it'd be great if you could talk about the issues as you see them today, the work that's being done to change them, and how successful you feel that is.
Yeah, no, of course. And yeah, like everyone, yeah, absolutely shocked and appalled by some of the things that we've seen. The David Carrick case recently, absolutely just almost, it does leave you speechless, just how appalling that is, and that a serving officer would perpetrate those crimes. And, I think, we meet, the service and the Commissioner has spoken a lot about in terms of the work and the pace of the work that we need to do to root out individuals like that, and also to prevent individuals coming into the service in the first place. I think the first Baroness Casey report touched on many of the issues in terms of the structural issues that we need to address in order to make sure we've got the systems and the processes and the leadership. And I count myself in that. I'm a police leader. So leaders set the tone, and you need to make sure your leadership radars are tuned to some of the issues and think about what you're telling your officers and staff, when they're joining, and so on and so forth. So I think part of the response, and again, the Commissioner's talked about it as well, which is investing more in terms of our corruption and abuse command. So the new corruption and abuse command that's been formed. So increasing the number of officers and strengthening the approach to dealing with misconduct, to identify misconduct. I think second to that is how we increase our ability for officers and the public to report corruption. So the recent Crime Stoppers launch. So not only can officers report, and often a lot of brave and officers with huge integrity do support and challenge individuals, and some of these cases have come as a result of that. So again, it's about encouraging the public to report things, and also for officers, and it's for leaders in policing to create the environments where people feel confident that they can report, and if they report something, they will be supported. And certainly, I invest a lot of my time in making sure that we create that environment, and that's a mixture of messaging, speaking to staff, speaking to line managers, training, and a whole host of other things that we need to do. Leaders are also role models, so it's about what I do as a leader and what people see about me. So it's making sure that I have the highest standards and my team have the highest standards, which we strive every day to achieve. I think we are also not alone. I don't want to divert and think about other services or other public services or other organisations, but there is a wider issue around misogyny and culture and so on that some of the previous questions touched on. We also collaborate with some of those other services that have faced recent reports and others around some of the culture in those organisations to think about what more we can do, what we can learn in terms of making sure that we have the right level of service, and we prevent individuals entering the service, and if they do, we're able to spot them quickly and have the right mechanisms to exit individuals out of the organisation quickly. So at the moment, the Met, as I say, has invested more in that, in able to do that. I think the Commissioner talked at the Police and Crime Committee a few weeks ago, and I think got reported in the news about we may see 2 or 3 of these types of cases, or cases involving police officers, a week over the next year or so, in terms of the pace and what we're trying to achieve. So it will be incredibly uncomfortable and so on, but it's really necessary to make sure, in order to protect our integrity, to make sure that we police with consent and be a trusted partner, be a trusted service, that we do root out those individuals, and we fix the structures and processes enabled to do that. So we're on that sort of I'm going to use the word journey, but there's a really strong plan, there's really strong messaging, strong leadership around it, there's more investment. It's an area of intense scrutiny which will continue, and then we can come back here and report on that progress in due course.
Thank you. Councillor Wanganjo.
I had a question on missing girls. In the reports and the presentation, I see that there's statistics on violence against persons, and also, what was the other one? Apologies. and child exploitation, but we've obviously seen an increase of missing girls in the news nationally, especially with women from the Black and ethnic minority community. I wanted to know how that was recorded in Southwark and what is the work that you're doing concerning that. Is it did you guys put that under like the violence against persons or child exploitation, or is that something that you would record completely separately?
Yeah, so it kind of depends. So I'll elaborate on that. So we have a dedicated missing persons unit, for example. So the way that so we receive hundreds of missing persons reports every month, and we assess those high, medium risk, low, medium, and high risk of all persons. Young people will often be in the medium to high risk because of age, for example, but it's all based on risk factors. So we have a lot of policy and process in relation to how we deal with missing as a baseline. Those that are graded as high risk will be dealt with by a missing persons unit, which is a dedicated team within our public protection team, and they will conduct those investigations. And it may be during the course of those investigations that other factors come into play around exploitation, for example. And so we've invested and worked alongside the council around how we better understand exploitation of young people in particular. We've also looked at how we make sure our officers better understand the signs to look for in terms of exploitation. And that could range from a number of things. It could be counter-lines drug dealing, it could be human trafficking, it could be sexual exploitation of young people, for example. So the way we are structured to set up with it, it just depends. If it's a missing person, someone could report a young person missing, and then we follow the sort of lines of inquiry in relation to that. We've also looked as well and thought about things around unconscious bias and adultification, making sure that we're treating children as children. So we're thinking about how we make sure our officers are culturally competent in that sense, in terms of, for example, we talked about young Black girls, for example. So it's just making sure that our officers have greater understanding in terms of cultural factors, thinking about different factors in terms of risk, you're looking at things in terms more generally around, as I say, exploitation or county lines and how people could get involved in gang crime, violent crime, etc., etc. So, and then a lot of that information is taken into a multi-agency setting in terms of having that multi-agency conversation to assess that risk and what is the partnership approach in relation to that. So that's our general approach. I haven't got any statistics in terms of being able to tell you the number, and maybe that's something that we can take away and provide a response back. I think we're always alive to thinking about, there been some cases reported in the media, not from necessarily from Southwark, just around the level of, and it comes back to the trust and confidence piece as well, which is, it is the service that we're providing, the level of service we're providing, in line with the expectations of the public and with communities, and there's making sure that we think through sensitively where there's perceived differences. So whether we treat a young white girl differently to a young Black girl, for example, and making sure that our response isn't biased and is appropriate, and there isn't a difference. And so that comes through training and supervision and leadership and so on, and working with various partners and organisations in our response. So, but I can come back with some figures. I think the other bit as well, because I think previously I've talked about ride-along schemes, for example, and we have had members come and look at some of our police units and so on. So if there's an appetite to come and maybe visit the missing persons unit or come and see what we do more close up, then be welcome to extend that invitation to come and have a look and chat to some of the officers that deal with that.
Thank you. I'm going to ask another question, then I have Councillor Foster. It sort of feeds on from the trust confidence piece, and it's obviously there's the question of what people expect before they encounter the police, and then there's the feedback they give afterwards. For background, I used to work for victim support some years ago, and if I hadn't, I don't think I'd ever heard of user satisfaction surveys. I'm quite surprised that they're not better known as a metric of police performance. And certainly when I was very aware of them, the Metropolitan Police as a whole was doing worse than every other police force in the country on pretty much every metric that's tested by those. So sorry, just for those not aware, these are the surveys undertaken by people who have actually had contact with the police, who have actually reported crimes. I wondered if, is there a Southwark breakdown that you're made aware of in your position, and what is it in general terms?
Yeah, general terms, so we break it down into two ways. So there's a general victim or user satisfaction survey results, and around about 65% of victims say they received a good or excellent service by officers in Southwark. And it looks at a range of crime types, so from violent crime, I think it now includes domestic abuse, robbery, burglary, and I think it used to include vehicle crime, but I don't think it does anymore. So it's around about 65%. We also look at the same survey with Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities to see if there's a difference in the service that we provide, and look at that gap. And I haven't got figures to hand, but I can get you them because I get them quite regularly. The gap is quite small in Southwark and Lambeth. So it's around about the 63-64% mark. It fluctuates a little bit. It includes hate crime as well, by the way. And then we get a further breakdown. We get the comments from people where they've made comments. We get a breakdown by crime type. And it breaks it down even further. So you get a breakdown from when the initial call was made, through to the initial response, through to the follow-up and aftercare, through to the investigation, and so on. So we're able to then really pinpoint the crime type and the bit of the process that is letting victims down, and then we can look to improve upon that. And so we include that in our monthly performance meetings to see what more we can do in those areas. And so generally, the borough performs, compared to other London boroughs, really well. We have been, in the sort of the top 5 of boroughs. I think at the moment we're sort of just below that, but we're usually in a good position. And the whole host of different factors around that. But I like to think, one of them is the majority of our officers do a really great job, do look after victims. We tend to respond quickly to calls, so our response to emergencies and non-emergency calls is really good compared to other London boroughs. We do a lot of messaging and training around making sure we go the extra mile for victims and so on. And then we measure things like how we refer people to other services, including victim support.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Thanks. Thanks for your answer earlier. I just wanted to follow up on it. In terms of your sort of analysis of the problem or the cause of the problem. So you mentioned a few things. There's the nature of misogyny in society more broadly, and racism, of course. And there's a question of kind of filtering or of quality control of people who enter the police force. But I'm interested to know, you identified that there are some structural elements as well. I'm interested to know how you view those, given that, as I touched on, it's a very long-standing problem that the Met has historically been quite resistant to reform, and whether you see that, as far as your experience of policing locally, whether you feel that there is that kind of cultural resistance, or if you feel that that's not the case.
Yeah, so I suppose I'll answer the last bit first. So, I agree with the Commissioner in that the vast majority of officers that we have policing London, policing Southwark, are good, hard-working officers who've got integrity, are professional, got compassion, and they've got a huge amount of courage in terms of the things they do and deal with on a daily basis. There are a small number of officers that we have identified who have either committed criminal acts or they've done things that fall below the standards that we expect on a range of issues. So use of force, or how they've responded to a particular crime, or either sexist remarks, and so on and so forth. And react quickly to identify them and make sure that we follow a misconduct process, which then at the ultimate, in the more serious cases, can lead to dismissal. And in some cases, some of those officers have been found guilty at court criminal acts, around domestic abuse, for example. And there's been a couple, in the last 6 months, been reported, with officers from Lambeth and Southwark in that category. So, but they are a minority of officers. So I think the other element comes back to is some of this is around human behaviours. It's around what people say. It's how they act. It's what they do. It's the choices that people make, and it's the boundaries that people don't adhere to, that they should adhere to, the professional boundaries that that exist. And so some of that comes down to, well, a lot of that I think comes down to leadership, awareness, and training. So we have a program of training called Signa, which is linked to a reporting app, for example, so that people can report. You're talking about the sort of lower level type things earlier. So internally, we have a system where we can report some of those issues and start to get heat maps and understand where some of those problems exist in the organisation and do something about it. And on the back of that is training around what we call daily dilemmas. So scenarios that are put up in front of groups of officers to talk through with supervisors and leaders. What do you think of this? What would you do in this circumstance? Have you got the courage to call it out and do something about it? And so it's about raising that awareness and training. It's not to say the officers that are being trained are bad officers, but it's creating a culture in which reporting that wrongdoing or those issues is the right thing to do and will be supported. And it's also about creating a culture, where sometimes it's a bit, there's a sort of a gradient, and officers can talk to someone and educate someone about something that they may have said or misspoke or whatever, and they become aware and not do it again, through to something far more serious, which needs some swift intervention and could lead to a misconduct process. So my assessment really is that the vast majority are incredibly amazing officers that work hard every single day. But we need to do far more and do it far more quickly around identifying people who don't have the behaviours or do things that are either criminal or inappropriate, that whole scale. By giving people the confidence, by making sure our systems, when I talk about structural things, part of that is around the recent developments in the new corruption and abuse command that the Commissioner has established with the extra officers to put in a structure in place to actually deal with some of those cases much quicker. So that is now up and running. And so that's, I think, why he was commenting on the fact that we will see more of those cases coming through at a more frequent basis because we've got more officers invested in that. And I think in the Casey, first Baroness Casey report, she talked about some vetting and talked a little bit around some of the police regulations and how the police regulations can be applied. So some of those structural elements again being looked at, and how we can use some of the existing regulations to where we've identified officers that shouldn't be police officers to again exit them out of the organisation quickly. Because the sooner we can do all of those things and then speak with confidence around what we've done, you can see that you'll see it in the news or you see it reported, or I'll come back and report about it. That greater reassurance for the public is in place, that actually we've done something about it, and people can be confident when they pick up the phone that they're going to get an officer who's got the right values.
Thank you. I have. I wondered if we could just ask you about an issue that came up in the previous item, which is the Women's Safety Centre. Still some time off as a reality. Have you been privy to any discussions about that so far? And whether you have or not, do you have a view on what the role of the police should be in the delivery of that sector?
Yeah, it's probably going to be a shorter answer to my previous one, I'm afraid. I personally haven't, but it's not to say my team have. So I haven't got any sort of solid information I can sort of brief you on or update you on here. So I probably have to take that one away, and I can always provide a written response in the usual way, if that's helpful.
Do you have any views off the cuff?
Well, I think, again, I think I don't know enough about it in order to form. I don't want to give a off the cuff because it's something that for me sounds like it needs a lot of thought and serious consideration. Mm-hmm. yeah, it's incredibly important that we just do whatever we can to protect women and provide the services that we can. And we would work in partnership with the council and others to do just that. So yeah, it's pretty so I can't answer you fully, but certainly I take that away and back into the partnership with my colleagues to make sure it gets a full consideration.
Thank you. I am going to finish with another off-the-cuff opportunity. It might be one that you would like to take, given that there's a certain freedom that comes with being on the point of changing jobs. This commission does now have to turn its attention to making practical recommendations that actually stand a chance of being implemented in a way where our residents will feel the benefit. These recommendations are to our cabinet. They aren't to you. I aren't to the police. What recommendation you
Look at it. I think things I would think about would be, and we've actually spoken all about this and thought about it through the community safety partnership. So there's a theme around location-based problem solving, and so there's some really good examples of where that happens on a regular basis, and actually some great examples with the council. Camberwell, for example, we've seen a lot of joint activity around dealing with antisocial behaviour, drug dealing, and so on. So I think there's a principle around that problem-solving approach and that joint approach, and I think within that, it's around the conversations that take place with local residents to inform that and to generate a sense of space and place. And it's thinking about, there's a lot of regeneration happening in the borough, and a lot of regeneration opportunities in the future. So again, I think there is something that we can work collaboratively around, maximising the opportunities those present, so that when money is spent to, whether it's a new station in Peckham or whether it's other developments that are taking place, that on the back of that, there's investment from local communities because they've been involved in those conversations, and there's actions that take place to respond to what people have told us as a partnership. So that we've got cleaner streets, safer streets, etc., etc., etc. So I think for me, that's been a strong theme and something we've talked about and acted upon in the partnership. So I think that'd probably be the main thing. I think the other area is you're probably looking at around demand. I think demand across the partners has risen in different ways. You talked about the cost of living, but we also got things like mental health demand, demand through increasing the use of drugs, for example. And we've got Project Adder, which you may know about, which is a funded project which we're working collaboratively again to reduce the harm caused by drugs. We've got demand through other service users creating, whether it's calls. So I think it's around thinking about what is the nature of demand in the borough between different services, where are the gaps, because there could be vulnerable people in those gaps, for example. Are people getting the right response from the right service? So there's kind of a conversation to be had, I think, around that area. So I'll quit there, because if I'm too off the cuff, my colleagues behind me, right? But I think those two areas are probably key. And I think, sorry, one last thing, I think, and it links to the first question, is we've taken part in the Southwark 2030 sort of conversations. I think they're really important, again, linked into that first piece. So I think that approach and that principle around how we engage residents and communities in owning the space and understanding it, how services are shaped in order to provide a service to local residents, I think again is really important. So anything we can do to strengthen that work and that approach, and then take the learning out of the Southwark 2030 stuff to inform again that problem solving location based work in the future, I think would be really good.
Thank you. Unless there are any last minute further questions, I think go on then, Bassi.
Mine is a very short one. I'm going to be speaking on the ward panel. The ward panel. So what's the view about the ward panel and what has been done so far to strengthen it? Because when we had the area commander last time, there were some issues about whether it's functioning or not, how it's going to be revived. So what's your view about it, and how can that be used to strengthen or build that community and police partnership?
Yeah, no, so I think ward panels are invaluable, as I do our Safe Neighbour Board, and I know our Southwark Safe Neighbour Board chair is in attendance tonight, Althea. So I think because what that does, it provides the opportunity for local residents to speak to local policing teams, a bit of accountability, sharing that information, that local information that may not be available in a police data system, and agreeing some priorities which are helpful to local communities to go and deal with. If done well, that's what you said we did bit, and local residents gain confidence by having raised an issue that then subsequently dealt with by the local policing team. I think all ward panels, I've always kind of there's always a question around, are they representative? Are they tapping into seldom heard groups, etc., etc. But I think there's just an incumbent thing for all of us to do what we can to signpost where they exist, to encourage participation, and then help shape what happened with very, very local policing. And I think those panels and those chairs, reporting into, for want of a better phrase, into our Safe Neighbour Board. I went to a public meeting just before Christmas, really well attended in Peckham, which Althea led, ward panel chair members there, local groups there, and so on. I was there with my team. So that accountability and that question and answer can then take place. So local people feel they've got an ability to question a borough commander or a superintendent. Again, it's really important. So anything we can do to strengthen those local networks and mechanisms, I think is really invaluable. Because then it also, and this is something we've reflected on in the community safety partnership, is how do we bring experts and experience into that strategic thinking space to inform on that decision making. And you can see, if you like, ward panels at the base of the pyramid, and then you've got the Safe Neighbour Board, and then the community safety partnerships and other partnerships. And we need to make sure that we're trying to get the voices and feedback from residents and business groups and others into that space, so we know then that we're providing services that residents want us to.
Thank you. I think we'll draw that item to a close, and thank you very much, Chief Superintendent, for your report and the answers to our questions, and for your 3 years as our Borough Commander.
Thank you, Chair.
I think that means we can move on to our final item, members, which is just to note the work programme, the remaining items on it for this year. The only substantive item we currently have on our agenda for our next meeting is to look again at the repairs, the housing repairs improvement plan. I imagine there will be at least one other item to look at. Oh, yes. Yes, yeah. And in addition to any other substantive items, we will obviously need to look at drafting our recommendations, as that is actually our last meeting of the year, believe it or not. So I have to take a steer from my scrutiny colleagues. Is that enough for an agenda? Or should we aim not to add any more other than what we've already mentioned? Yes. Okay. Yes. Perfect. Yes, Ina.
Could I ask about, I read the document about the plan, and I want to ask for clarification. I'm looking, and I go around to various departments for the last 7 months. Chris Claridge from the Tenants Council tried to ask the question twice in this committee, what is happening with resident involvement, and she was told every time of the 2 times that is not going to be addressed by this committee.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, for the last 7 years, since Kaizen report was written in 2016, 2017, the residents' involvement was reviewed under this committee.
No, it wasn't. Sorry, let me just come back on that. That was when this commission was called something else and had a different remit. Community engagement now sits with a different commission. We have made that clear. It's not something I can answer. It's not something colleagues here can answer. We do have to respond to it offline.
On this page is actually written exactly what, and I have been part of this process, so I do appreciate that it was a sort of a statement, but I was involved in 2017. So if we look in the specification, it's written that it is in the remit of this committee, the tenant and homeowners involvement, and it's talking about TRAs, and it's talking about the leaseholders and about the tenants. So the whole reason of me and Chris, we have been for the last 7 years for this commission, is this process which has been followed for so many years.
I'm very sorry, we're not going to be able to deal with this in this commission because it's not part of this remit. The specific issue that you raised. As you know, it was a decision that was made by the chair of OSC, of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, to change the specific remits that sit with each commission. It is going to have to be addressed at that level. I'm not able to give you any further answers than we have so far.
What is the name of the change?
You've been in an email exchange about this. I'm sorry. This just isn't appropriate for this commission. It's not within our remit. It has to be taken offline, I'm afraid. Does anyone have any further comments to make on the work plan and the next meeting? Yes.
I just wanted to double check the dates changed to the 13th, right?
Thank you for prompting me. I was just going to draw everyone's attention to that. With apologies for people that had it in their diaries, the next meeting is going to be on the 13th of April and not, as I believe was originally scheduled, was it the 18th? 19th. So if it's still in your diary for the 19th, please do change that to the 13th because you wouldn't want to miss out on the joy of making recommendations. Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, your councillors usually have received updated diary invitations. Is that also true for co-opted members? Yes, excellent. Okay. Any other items? Any other business to raise at this point of the agenda? Okay, I think that means we can draw the meeting to a close then. Thank you very much as ever for your participation and your questions, and see you in April.